afternoon, good evening, or good morning from wherever you're joining us from today in the world. My name's Sarah and I'm the Program and Event Manager at the Reactor in Sydney, Australia. Welcome to another Microsoft Reactor Sydney live stream event. Today we'll be doing episode 2 of our Glue It series, which is hosted by Fabio Braga. And today, which you can see here waving, and he has some guests which we'll introduce you to shortly. Firstly, a bit of background on Fabio for anyone joining us for the first time today. So he is the Chief Architect for Customer Success at Microsoft. He has more than 20 years of experience as a data and analytics professional. His passion for data architecture led him to design and implement mission-critical solutions in large and complex environments, such as healthcare providers, government departments, water and energy companies, superannuation, and financial organizations. We're also joined today by Singh, who you'll see there in the bottom. Kenny is the cybersecurity lead at Microsoft in Australia and New Zealand. He has extensive experience in various facets of cybersecurity, including identity and access management, security of endpoints, apps, data, network, infrastructure, and governance, risk and compliance. And last but not least, in the middle here, we have Dimitrios Asselos. So Dimitrios is a cybersecurity architect for customer success at Microsoft. He also has more than 10 years experience in cybersecurity, working with a variety of global customers from different industries, where he's designed multiple security architecture solutions. Currently, his focus is in zero trust and modern security operations design. So today we'll be speaking for about 40 to 45 minutes. Included in that will be a presentation and a demonstration, and we'll have some times for questions as well. However, do ask your questions throughout and we will answer as many as possible in that comment section there. We'll also be providing you with a feedback survey with the event code, which we'll share at the end. And if there's anything that you did miss from today, there's an on-demand version available on YouTube straight after today on our Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. But for now, I'll hand the floor over to Fabio to begin. So thanks so much, Fabio, and over to you.
Everyone, welcome back. We are back on the Glue It series in our second episode, right? So we started the Glue It series a couple of weeks ago, talking about how the entire Microsoft Cloud enables a set of capabilities for you to build some complete solutions. And today, in our episode 2, we're going to proceed on that journey, right? So just a bit of a recap before we bring Kenny and Dimitrios to the conversation. I just wanted to do a recap of what we talked about with episode 1 and what's going to be the goals of the series. So we started talking about what is the Microsoft Cloud. So what do you mean by Microsoft Cloud? We're talking about all of these comprehensive set of capabilities around modern workplace, business applications, infrastructure, digital and app innovation, data and AI, and security capabilities that we use to build complete solutions to businesses out there, right? So that's the entire capability of the Microsoft Cloud. You probably know some of these capabilities by their commercial names under the clouds, for example, with Microsoft 365 for modern workplace, where Teams and SharePoint, some of the services are in that space. You know Azure as being the cloud provider for infrastructure, digital and app innovation, and data and AI capabilities, right? And you know, for example, Dynamics 365 as the cloud where there's a collection of SaaS applications that provide some business capability there. Right. And with the Microsoft Cloud, we now have specific industry vertical solutions that we've been called the Microsoft Cloud for Industry Solutions. You see on the top, Microsoft Cloud for Financial Services, for Healthcare, Manufacturing, Nonprofit, and Retail, which is exactly solutions for these verticals that have been implemented leveraging the full power of the Microsoft Cloud, right? And we... In that first episode, we also talked about what are the main components of the Microsoft Cloud, right? So we start talking about the foundations and the base of security and identity and compliance. And we have the components between Azure, Power Platform, GitHub, Microsoft 365, and Dynamics 365, right? And in the 7 episodes of our Glue It series, we're going to walk through this specific stack, right? So we start talking about the main integration points between these components that we allow solution architects to build Microsoft Cloud solutions, leveraging the full power of these capabilities that I've just mentioned to you, right? So today, episode 2, we are here. We're at the bottom of the stack, talking about identity, talking about security, and how Azure Active Directory provides this umbrella, this identity umbrella over all of these service capabilities that I just mentioned before, over Azure, over Dynamics, Microsoft 365, right? And today we're going to talk about Microsoft security as a whole, not just Azure AD. We're gonna focus, we're gonna zoom in Azure AD. But before we go there, I just wanted to bring Microsoft security into perspective, because Azure AD is one of 55 different services in the security space for Microsoft. We are now recognized, Microsoft is now recognized kind of a security vendor in that space, one of the best capabilities in the market. So today we're going to have a look and try to understand what is Microsoft security, what makes Microsoft security, understand a little bit of the concepts of zero trust architecture, and then finally understand exactly how Azure Active Directory plays a very important role to be the identity provider and access management for Microsoft Cloud Solutions. So to help us with this conversation, I would love to invite my good friend Kenny Singh for this conversation. And Kenny, can you just say hello to everyone? And the stage is yours here.
Hey Fabio, how are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you going, man?
Thank you so much for having me on this very important conversation. It's my absolute pleasure to be here. So look, to our audience, it's such a pleasure to talk to you about cybersecurity, privacy, zero trust identity. There's actually a lot of topics we'll actually touch on over the course of the next 40 to 45 minutes. But let me please just start with why cybersecurity and privacy. Why do we actually think that cybersecurity and privacy is so critical in the times that we actually live in right now? So we believe at Microsoft that cybersecurity and privacy is the very fundamental cornerstone of democracy. Right? And democracy is all about ensuring that we have a very diverse, equitable, and inclusive world. Right? So it goes back to what the values are that we basically live by. Right? The values of diversity, the value of equity, the value of inclusiveness, the value of ensuring that when our organizations and customers want to transform, they actually have the confidence, they have the trust, they have the belief that the platform that they're transforming through, Azure, Dynamics, Microsoft 365, and a plethora of other cloud services, that they are secure, that they are trustworthy, and then that any data they actually store in these cloud services is protected at all times. So my team, the security solution area, or the security team in the customer success division, we're actually in the same division, Fabio and I, which is our customer success division. We're all focused on customer success. My area focuses on security specifically. We're a globally experienced team of architects and engineers, as you can actually see there. Our purpose is to help customers protect their entire digital estate. And look, I just wanted to zoom in on the word entire digital estate. That sounds very markety, but it's a lot more than that, right? So when we say entire digital estate, we truly mean the entire digital estate. And I'll actually talk a lot more about that in a couple of minutes. But we do mean multi-cloud and multi-platform. So we do mean beyond Microsoft as well. So to help our customers protect their entire digital estate so they can confidently and with trust, grow, create, and innovate, right? So we're actually all about ensuring that customers are able to digitally transform using digital technology, too many uses of the word digital, with a very high degree of security and trust. Can we go to the next slide, please, Fabio? Right, so we just wanted to reflect for 1 minute on what the ANZ cybersecurity landscape looks like, just to give you an idea, a glimpse of the magnitude of the escalation we're actually seeing right now. So we're seeing an unprecedented escalation in the scale, frequency, and sophistication of cyber attacks. Right? It's partly fueled by the pandemic. If you think about things like remote work, you think about personal devices, you think about untrusted Wi-Fi's, you think about data basically living all over the place rather than a very protected corporate environment or a trusted cloud. When you look at all of those factors together, that's just the recipe for a very, very expanded attack surface. And cyber criminals and hackers are very mindful of that, and they've taken that into consideration. And hence, we've actually seen a very significant escalation of cyber attacks. I'll just mention a couple of quick statistics to you, just to put this into perspective. In Australia and New Zealand, we actually had one cyber crime report to the Australian Cybersecurity Centre every 10 minutes in 2021. Right, that was the significance of that was the magnitude of the number of crime reports the Australian Cybersecurity Centre was actually getting. If you look at the total number of high-profile data breaches, we had 1,051 high-profile data breaches. The average cost of a data breach to an organization is $3.35 million. So it's very significant. And you would have probably seen some statistics around the average time it actually takes basically a customer organization to sense that there is someone who's actually broken into the network. It's in excess of 45 days. So imagine someone actually being in a corporate environment for 45 days and being detected after that. By that time, they would have actually laterally moved, and there would be a whole raft of things that they've actually done preparing for data exfiltration. So it's a very significant challenge. And then one final call out, $5.6 billion was the amount of cybersecurity spending across Australia and New Zealand, more than that, to actually protect against these sophisticated attacks. Was that enough? No, that wasn't enough. And one of the challenges we actually have is that the cybersecurity industry is a relatively new industry. So the standardization is still a work in progress. And this was actually very very beautifully articulated by a very recent Economist article that asked the very fundamental question, is cybersecurity the new market for lemons? And what they were basically saying is that when you deploy a solution, when you deploy a component, whether that's in the cloud or whether that's on premises, are we really that sure? Do we have a way to measure that what was deployed is in fact doing what it was actually supposed to be doing? So we go to the next slide, please, Fabio. So really, what really is the big deal about Microsoft security? So I actually mentioned the entire digital estate before, right? So multi-cloud, multi-platform. So what we basically mean by that is that in designing, in architecting Microsoft security. So Fabio referred to the fact that we have over 55 different security services in Microsoft security. First and foremost, we've actually focused on multi-cloud, multi-platform. So whether you run Azure, Dynamics, Microsoft 365, AWS, GCP, Salesforce, or over 26,000 different SaaS applications, Microsoft security can protect. Whether you run iOS, Android, Linux, Windows, Mac, Microsoft security can protect, right? So first and foremost, it's multi-cloud and multi-security, multi-cloud and multi-platform. Second, we've really focused on what does the landscape look like right now? What does the threat landscape looks like right now? What are the new cybersecurity strategies that need to be adopted to protect against the landscape that we actually have, right? So how do we leverage zero trust? And it's a very big buzzword these days, and we'll take you a little deeper into what zero trust really means. But what really is this zero trust, and how you can incorporate that in the cybersecurity strategy today? What does it really mean, practically speaking? A risk-based approach to cybersecurity. We've actually had a traditional approach of looking at cybersecurity with a maturity lens. So what really does a cyber risk management-led approach to cybersecurity looks like? And then if you actually look at the final pillar there, it's the simplicity. How do you actually ensure that you're simplifying? So you have signals coming in from your devices, you have signals coming from identities, you have signals coming in from your network and infrastructure and SaaS applications. How do you put all of those signals together? How do you actually say that an IP address, an indicator of compromise that was seen on an endpoint, is the same indicator of compromise that was actually seen in a cloud app? And hence, all of these things together are one security incident. So how do you actually leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning to coalesce all these signals together and present it to organizations in a single pane of glass, where they basically say, right, I understand that all these different indicators of compromise across my entire digital estate are essentially one incident, and here is the priority of that incident. And so there's a lot of work we've actually done on that. So next slide, please, Fabio. Right, so talking about the modernization of cybersecurity strategy. So what really is zero trust? So look, simply put, the words zero trust are actually very self-explanatory, right? So what it basically means is that irrespective of what identity or what device or what location someone is actually accessing the data from, that access is always treated with zero trust. So what that basically means is that access is always explicitly verified. One of the principles that you see there, verify explicitly. We always assume that there is going to be a breach at some point, so we prepare for that adequately, and we always ensure least privilege access. What does verify explicitly mean? What it basically means is that when someone logs into a specific application to access data, how do we actually ensure that those logon credentials were not stolen? When someone uses a specific device to access data, how do we ensure that there's no malware on that device? Right? Because if there's malware on the device and they put data on that device, that malware can basically exfiltrate that data. Right? So how do we actually take all of these different signals into consideration in ensuring that the data access is protected and the data itself is protected? So those are the three fundamental principles that we actually have for zero trust. And look, zero trust has gained a lot of credibility over the last few years. The US federal government has basically put out a zero trust directive for all federal government agencies, and there are very similar directives in the works across the globe, right? So zero trust really is that front of mind strategy, especially in the hybrid world that we actually live in right now, the hybrid work world that we actually live in right now. So next slide, please, Fabio. Okay, so so when we actually think about a zero trust architecture beyond technology, right? Just keeping Microsoft aside for 1 second. When we think about a zero trust architecture, what are we really thinking about? So we're actually thinking about 6 different vectors. And look, vectors is just a fancy word of saying that these are the 6 different doors of attack. So you actually have identities as a door of attack. You have endpoints, you have apps, you have data, you have network, and you have infrastructure. So doors of attack, as in that hackers and cyber criminals can basically come in through these doors and compromise a specific organization's infrastructure and assets, right? So I'll give you an example. Let's assume for 1 second I'm a cyber criminal and I send an email out, and that email actually has an attachment with it. Someone basically clicks that attachment, that installs a malware on the machine, right? Now I actually have control of the machine, but the identity that the user was logged on to the machine with, it does not have enough privileges to it. So then what I actually do is I start looking at the Windows credential store or some other credential store, depending on what platform it actually is. And I basically use Kerberos tokens and actually go to different file servers and so on and so forth. And I'm actually now laterally moving across the environment, across the infrastructure to find a specific identity that's very privileged. And eventually my goal is to go to the domain controller and get domain dominance there. So I can start exfiltrating the data, I can start creating accounts, because the moment I get domain dominance, as in the moment I get a hold of the domain controllers, I actually have complete control on the customer's environment, right? So there's quite a few different doors through which I can actually come. I can come in through an email. I can actually just drop a USB stick on someone's desk, and they, what we call social engineering. They just plug the USB in, and there's malware on that. So the 6 doors of attack are the 6 vectors. There's identities, endpoints, apps, data, network, and infrastructure.
Kenny, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Look, the purpose of this series called Glue It is to explore, for example, the capabilities of the entire Microsoft cloud, right? So we're talking about Azure components, Dynamics 365, and the Power Platform. And when I look at these 6 vectors here, I'm thinking about a solution that, let's say, it's a web application running in Azure that has integration with Teams, and can potentially send emails or receive emails through Microsoft 365 and Outlook, and has some data, for example, sitting on databases in Azure. And this application, for example, is being accessed externally by my salespeople, for example, from any devices that they can bring. So how can the zero trust policy can protect this environment?
Thank you, Febo. Look, that's a great question, right? So I'll actually just repeat the question. So what you're basically saying is that when you have a multi-tiered application that might span on premises and in the cloud, and actually has components spread all over the place, right? How do you actually orchestrate a zero trust strategy? You might be using microservices or containers or whatever it actually is. How do you orchestrate a zero trust strategy that basically protects the whole thing? So it actually comes down to those 6 doors of attack. right? So let me just very quickly mention how you would potentially orchestrate this. So at an identity layer, you would actually apply identity protection. You would basically check for whether that identity is compromised or not when someone actually tries to access your application, right? So first and foremost, it's always the identity. That's the first door, right? So you could protect it with multi-factor authentication. You could actually look at threat intelligence signals on whether that identity was compromised on the dark web. You could basically look at all of those different signals. Someone tried to log in from Melbourne, and 15 minutes later, we saw an authentication attempt from Sydney. The AI and ML algorithms can look at that and basically say, look, we think that's an impossible travel scenario, right? So it's things like that. Then endpoints. Depending on what device someone is actually using, is that device compliant? Is that device healthy? Irrespective of where the data in the application actually lives, right? Your endpoint, your smart endpoint is very critical. How do we actually ensure that the endpoint that you're accessing the data from is protected at all times? Then for the application itself, how do we actually ensure data loss protection or data loss prevention in the application? So, we have cloud access security brokers and so on and so forth, things that basically have API level hooks into the applications, and they can basically look at whether the data that is classified as sensitive in the application, and obviously there's a mechanism required for classifying data as sensitive, and there's Microsoft information protection for that. But once the data is classified as sensitive, identified and classified as sensitive, how is it actually being shared? Is it being shared outside the organization? Should it be shared outside the organization, and so on and so forth? So basically, where I'm actually going with that, Fabio, is that these 6 different doors: identities, endpoints, apps, data, network, and infrastructure. When you orchestrate a zero trust strategy, then irrespective of what the architecture of your application is, whether it's a legacy application hosted in infrastructure as a service or on premises, whether it's a modern application, microservices and containers, and all the fancy new modern paradigms that we actually have to create a really scalable application, zero trust works in all the different scenarios. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. It does, absolutely. Thank you.
So go to the next slide, please. And so this is what the Microsoft Zero Trust architecture looks like, right? So Microsoft Zero Trust architecture, those 55 plus services that we were talking about. So when you look at identities, you have Azure Active Directory, you have Microsoft Defender for identities that constantly monitors your domain controllers to see if there's any analogous activity there. From endpoints, you have Microsoft Endpoint Manager and Intune, which looks at the device compliance and health of your devices. Apps, you actually have the Microsoft Cloud App Security, or now called Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Data protection, so identification of sensitive data, classification of sensitive data, you have Microsoft Information Protection. Network and infrastructure, you have Microsoft Defender for Cloud, you have Azure Firewall, WAF, DDoS, Bastion. So there's quite a few different services that basically span all your 6 vectors, all your 6 your doors of attack, to actually protect them, to ensure that organizations have the highest degree of visibility there.
Yeah, Kenny, it's funny to see these names on the screen, because it reminds me of the experience that we have internally at Microsoft, right? You know that how many of our mission critical applications, like our CRM and our HR profiles, for example, they are public facing apps, web apps, that are accessible from anywhere in the world, right? So the endpoint is actually accessible. But funnily enough, if I try to access one of these endpoints using my correct username and correct password, but using a device that hasn't been registered before, for example, all of this contextual information about my login, not only my username and password, but also where the login is coming from and what device is being used, all of these are input signals to Azure AD that validates if I can actually authenticate or not. Is that how it works behind the scenes?
That's exactly right. That's absolutely right. And just a behind the scenes look, Fabio. So we did a lot of thinking, and we did a lot of, should I actually say, solutioning when we built all these doors, identities and endpoints and apps and data and network and infrastructure. So what I basically mean by that is that, let's just talk about identities for a second, right? So you have Azure Active Directory. The schema with which we capture, let's say, anomalous activity in Azure Active Directory. How do we ensure that schema for an IP address, I'm just going to take a specific indicator of compromise, right? That specific IP address, right? How do we ensure that the schema there is the same as the schema on an EDR solution? endpoint detection response, which in this case is Defender for endpoints. It could actually be any other solution, right? How do we ensure that that schema is then the same as the schema that we actually use for email security? When emails come in and a potentially malicious email. So what we've done is we've actually done a lot of ground base level work to ensure that we have schema consistency, the representation of data at an identities level, endpoints level, apps, data, network, and infrastructure level. So we coalesce all of that data. And then the other thing I also wanted to very quickly call out, Fabio, is that what we found is that different solutions have a different outlook on the level of risk that is acceptable to them. So I'll give you an example, right? If you think of a security operations team, when you look at an anti-malware solution and an endpoint detection response solution, they don't want to miss it, even if there is a false positive, right? So for example, you don't want to miss a malware. You'd rather lean towards false positive than false negative. Right? So you'd actually rather detect something than not detect something. When you look at identity security, you don't want a lot of false positives, right? You don't want a lot of noise, because that noise is actually going to distract you from the threat detection that you need to do, or the zooming in that you need to do on specific information. So where I'm going with that is that not only have we actually tried to solve this problem at a technical level, we've always also tried to solve this problem in terms of how we look at what is potentially suspicious and how much noise is created out of that as a holistic thing across all of these the different doors of attack. Does that answer your question, Fab?
That's very interesting. Thank you for that.
It's a pleasure. So if we go to the next slide then. So identity is the new control plane. Look, you'll probably hear this a lot from us. So what we basically mean by that, just simply put, what that basically means is, irrespective of what device you're on, irrespective of what location you're in, irrespective of whether your data lives on premises or it lives in the cloud, wherever you're accessing that data from, first and foremost, there's always going to be an identity. Right? Because there's not a lot of applications today that will actually allow unauthenticated access to applications. So that's why identity is the new control perimeter. Now, previously in cybersecurity, your network boundary was your control perimeter. You had intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems. You had a whole raft of devices that basically put like a boundary around it. Like, for example, if you've seen the movie Troy, you actually had this huge wall around that city, and it was unpenetrable. The challenge is that that walled garden paradigm just doesn't hold anymore, because you have people working from anywhere. You actually have personal devices, company devices, and so on and so forth. So identity is the new control plane, because it's that new perimeter. It's that thing that you actually have to control. And over 88% of cyber attacks across the globe have actually been one way or the other linked to compromised identities. So I just want to call out just a couple of final things on identity. So Microsoft Identity, that's both identity and access management, and it's identity security as well, right? So for example, we actually do end-to-end lifecycle management of identities, and simultaneously we actually do comprehensive identity security protection as well.
Fantastic. That's good, Kenny.
And then if you go to the next slide, and I promise you just 2 more slides to go before we get to the fun part with Dimi on the demo. So conditional access. This is something that actually sits at the very heart of Microsoft Zero Trust, right? So if I was to actually say, what is the brains of Microsoft Zero Trust, I'd actually say it's Azure AD Conditional Access. And the reason why this is the brains of Microsoft Zero Trust is because this is the adaptive policy framework, which takes into consideration the identities, the signals from identities, from endpoints, from locations, apps, data, and what we also call as sign-in risk, which is the AI and ML determining that this specific access attempt might be compromised? So simply put, Azure AD Conditional Access, it's a policy-based framework, and it looks at quite a few different signals, and you can apply controls. So for example, if the risk is high, ask the person to do multi-factor authentication. So it's basically paradigms like that.
Yeah, and Kenny, I see that MFA has become kind of one of the most common types of security controls to access applications out there, right? So we have banks, we have software as a service solutions, kind of always sending tokens to double check if you are who you say you are, if you have a device. So for organizations that may not need the policy, but they only require MFA, is there a solution that we can put in front of them?
Absolutely. Look, we actually heard very loudly and clearly from some of our organizations, some of our customers, that Azure AD conditional access for certain situations was quite complex, so they did not need that degree of granularity to apply security controls. So what we basically done is we made a very simple feature available. It's called sign-in defaults. And what sign-in defaults actually says is that literally through a couple of mouse clicks, you basically turn on sign-in defaults, and that turns on multi-factor authentication for every single identity in Azure Active Directory, both your administrator identities, so global admins and so on and so forth, and your end user identities as well. So it's a really simple way. If you don't need that adaptive policy framework, that's totally fine. You can just check a couple of boxes and you can turn on sign-in defaults. The only thing to be aware of is that this is mutually exclusive. So if you choose sign-in defaults, you can't do conditional access. So you'll have to turn off sign-in defaults and then switch to conditional access.
Got it. But once that is on, that enables, for example, multi-factor authentication over all of the Microsoft Cloud offers, for example, right?
That's exactly right. And look, I just want to also call out that it's multi-factor authentication for multi-cloud. So irrespective of what cloud you're actually trying to access, Azure, Dynamics, Microsoft 365, Salesforce, AWS, GCP, whatever you actually intend to access, you have multi-factor authentication and conditional access to all these different clouds. And we actually have a recent capability. It's called continuous access evaluations. So previously what used to happen is that your session to Azure Active Directory, with OAuth in mind, you had refresh tokens and access tokens. So as long as your refresh token was alive, you could basically go and renew your access token. What we've done now with the continuous access evaluation features is we basically said the moment an event happens, for example, someone compromised your account or your password changed or something like that, you will immediately be signed out of Azure Active Directory and you will completely lose access to all the applications. So that's called continuous access evaluation. It's a very exciting new feature.
Fantastic.
And then final slide there, Fabio, which is on Azure Active Directory B2b. And look, very mindful of time. So I just quickly mention, you'll hear the term Azure AD external identities. It includes two specific things. So it includes B2C and B2B. Azure AD B2C, or business to customer, is that specific capability that is meant for applications that actually require, for example, let's say education applications as an example. You have lots and lots of students logging in with Facebook and Twitter and a whole raft of other identities. So it really is business to customer in that sense. And then you actually have B2B applications. This is where you actually have your content stored in Microsoft 365, another application, and you're actually liaising with a business partner. You're actually sharing your content with a business partner. In both scenarios, you actually have Azure AD conditional access now. So you can use conditional access, that adaptive policy-based framework, and you can basically apply controls in an Azure Active Directory B2B scenario.
That's awesome. So King, I've always been curious about these external identities in a B2C scenarios. Can you tell me a little bit more about how these external identities, like for example, from an Outlook.com account or from a Gmail account or whatever that is, how that's kind of represented inside Azure AD?
Yeah, absolutely, Fabio. So if you look at Azure AD B2B identities, if you actually invite someone who has a Microsoft account, right, at Outlook.com, at Live.com, at Hotmail.com, if you ran a PowerShell script and you looked at the identity, so after you invited this user or after you collaborated with this user, if you enumerated the identities in Azure Active Directory, what you'll actually find is that we've created a shadow identity in Azure Active Directory. So you will actually see all the identities, whether they are homed in Azure Active Directory, which basically means that it actually has a UPN suffix that corresponds to the domains that you have verified, or it's something like, for example, if it's a social identity, you will actually have a shadow identity there, and you'll actually see this long UPN suffix that will represent that. But in any case, if you use the PowerShell script, and there's multiple ways of enumerating, if you use the PowerShell script, you can actually you can just call up a list of all the identities, and please do take the time to look at what the composition of a shadow identity is or a guest identity is. It's very interesting. It actually has, just the way they represent it in the UPN suffix.
That's good. I'll always be curious. Now I know.
Thank you, Fabio. And look, I'll just say one final thing on the final slide there. I just say that with cybersecurity, we really are all in it together. So what we basically mean by that is that whether you're an infrastructure architect, a data architect, a modern work architect, a dynamics architect, cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. We need to think about it from an app dev perspective in DevSecOps. We need to think about it in Microsoft, or should I actually say modern work security and hybrid work security. So security is really everyone's responsibility. And we'd just absolutely love to partner with you to explore how we best create a very safe Australia and New Zealand going forward. So with that, Fabio, I'll transition to Dimi, to the fun part of this session, which is all about a demonstration of what Azure AD B2b and conditional access looks like.
Let's
So
have
over to you,
some
Dimi.
fun.
Thank you.
Have some fun and see what Dimi has to show us today.
Thanks, Kenny. First of all, we just had a question come through from Grant before we moved on to the demo. Grant asks, what if he has a federated domain using a third party like ping or one login, etc.?
Yes. So if you had a federated domain, right? So look, we actually have quite a few different authentication models in Azure Active Directory. So you actually have what we call password hash sync, you have pass-through authentication, you have a federated model. So in a federated model, what basically happens is that you have another IDP or an identity provider, but you federated that with Azure Active Directory, right? So let's say it's ping federate. So what happens is when someone tries to log on to a specific application, the request goes to Azure Active Directory that basically passes the request back to ping federate. Let's assume that it's actually using SAML authentication. There'll be a SAML token that gets generated and passed back to Azure AD, and that's how the authentication happens. The beauty of the situation is that even if you're using a third-party IDP that's federated with Azure Active Directory, you get the full value of Azure AD conditional access. So you can still apply conditional access policies that look for the health of the endpoint, the security of the identity, and so on and so forth. So Azure AD conditional access policies are equally applicable to federated identities as they actually are to native identities in Active Directory and Azure Active Directory.
Great. Thanks for the answer, Kenny. So what we'll do now is we'll take off Fabio's screen, and Demetrios, we'll just put in your stream at the moment. I'll put in your screen there. So we've got that Word document open at the moment. Is that the correct?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay, great. I'll leave that with you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you very much, Ken and Fabio, for the great presentation. Before I start my demo, let me just quickly explain what is an Azure AD Entitlement Management, and then just go through the demo scenario. So the Azure Active Directory Entitlement Management is an identity governance feature that enables organizations to manage identity and access lifecycle at scale by automating access request workflows, access alignments, reviews, and expiration. So that was my only slides. So I'm just going straight to the demo now. Okay, so just give me 1 second, please.
So Jimmy, just while you load this, the quick question here to set the context, right? So with Azure AD Entitlement Management, I'm aiming to simplify the management of complex access that are required by an application, right? Let's say, for example, that for an application, I need a user needs access to specific folders, to specific databases, and to access to some specific SaaS applications. So entitlement management aims to simplify all of that, right? So as a package, is that the intention?
Yes. So you're just creating specific packages with specific resources, and you just assign these packages to the resource that you want to get access.
And the ability to have workflow approval, a self-service.
Yep.
I would like to be included in this package.
Yes.
And that triggers a workflow, then it can be approved.
Yes.
And then once it's approved, I'll be automatically added to those security groups that give me access to the resources, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Fantastic. There you go.
Okay. Let me just jump through the demo. Okay. So just give me again 1 second, please. Okay. So we're starting by just going to the Azure Active Directory. And then we're choosing our identity governance. And here we have pretty much the option, as you can see here, the entitlement management, the option to create a catalog. So a catalog is like you're just creating a catalog for your specific reasons, maybe like resources on marketing, IT resources, security, or so on. And you're just assigning specific like resources on that one. So as example, if I create a new one, I'm going to say demo here, demo here, I'm going to enable it, and this will be enabled for external users because you can use the entitlement management for internal users as well. It's not only for external ones. So when you're creating this one, you're just going inside and you just add resources. As you can see here, I can just click on add resources, and I can add specific groups and teams. As example, that's my lab environment, so I don't have a lot of groups. So I can just add, let's say, this group here, and then I can add specific applications. Again, I'll just add my demo application here, and also I will just add my SharePoint site, so which is this one here. So as I said, you just yes.
Yep. So in this case, for example, if I'm an architect developing an application that is made up of multiple components in the Microsoft Cloud, let's say Teams sites and file servers, and that's where, for example, you list all of the resources that you have that are required access. Is that right?
That may be a scenario. As I said, when you're creating a catalog, you're just pretty much adding the resources that you want your users, right? But then when you're creating your packages, where I'm going to show you in the next step, is when you can choose which resources you want from that catalog, because you can have multiple packages. So you can create one catalog, but you can have multiple packages for that one. As example, I said, like I created a catalog here with these specific resources. I'm not going to add it because I have already created one here. That's for our demo today. And I can see here, for example, this is the resource I added. So the next step when you're creating the catalog is going back to the identity governance, and then we're just creating a new access package. So this access package can only utilize the resources that you created on a specific catalog. So you cannot just add additional resources on that one. As example, if I create a new package, okay, let's say I'll just put like a demo here again, just put like a description, and here I can choose the catalog. So depending catalog you're choosing, you get like the specific resources, okay? As example, on this one I created earlier, I just choosing now that this package will be under the Microsoft Reactor catalog, okay? Just moving forward. And then what I can do is I can choose which resources I want from that catalog. But I have only the resources that I have chosen from that catalog earlier. So in this case, example, for my scenario, I want the third party to have access to my SharePoint. Okay, so I'm just choosing pretty much from all the resources that I have of this catalog. I'm choosing only that the partner organization they're going to connect through B2b, they will have only access to my SharePoint. Okay, and here you can also choose what permissions that third party will have. In our case, it will be like communication site visitors. Okay, just moving forward, and here you can choose. This will be like an internal user, or can be someone like it's not in your directory, and you can use it also for administrator purpose as well. So for our scenario, I'll just go for users not in your directory, and here what I'm going to do is like you have a few options here. You can specify specific connect organization. You can say I want all my configured connect organizations to have access, and I'll show you in a minute what that means. And also you can say all users, okay? For our scenario, I'll just go here, all configured connect organization. And then you can say, I want someone, when like they're gonna request access, someone to approve this one. So you have that option. They don't get like a straight away access to that resource. So you can say, I want someone to approve it. You can have up to two people to approve it. You can have an internal one and an external one. You can have, let's say, the internal manager and the manager of that partner. So I'm just going here with the internal sponsor, and I'm going to just add my test user. Select that one, and you can even specify that decision in how many days you're going to make that decision. And you can set here like a proof justification as well, and you can enable that for new requests. Just moving forward with that one. And here, what you can do is you can add specific questions. As example, what's the department that you're working? And this will be like a short text, and it will be like a required. Someone has to put that in order to get the approval. And then as example, like a manager name here. Manager name. Similar, this can be like a short answer, and thus this will be required. Going to the life cycle, you can choose when this package will be deleted. So you can say on specific date, specific numbers, You can even set like hours, or you can even say this will not expire at all. So let's say in our case, this will expire, let's say end of April. Okay. And also what you can do is you can do access reviews. So in case you have a package that you may want to be active for a year, right? And you want, let's say, every month to have like a reviews. So when a user is not using that package for more than a month, just revoke their access. And you have different options here. The users can do like a self review. So they're gonna get like an email. They're gonna it will be more like, do you still need access to that package? If the user will say no, then the access will be revoked. You can specify specific reviewers, or you can even say the manager of the individuals that they're gonna request the package to review that one. And you can set again annually, by like a monthly, weekly, and so on.
So Dimitri, on the expiration, so what that means is, for example, once someone is granted access through that package, so that's the duration of how long that person keeps the access for, right? So let's say it's not the expiration of the package itself, but the access given to a specific user, it starts counting from there, and then in a number of days, on a specific date, those access granted will be revoked, right?
So you have two options here. You can either pretty much say this package will expire in X days, but again, you have the access reviews. That's pretty much with the users, right? Yep. You're gonna say if the user would not they will not access for a month and they will not reply, let's say, to this review email, just revoke their access. So you have like a few options there to do that. Moving forward, so you can even set some if conditions here. This is still in preview, and you can pretty much review and create that one. I'm not going to create this one here because I already have one, which is this one here. So when you're creating the package, you're just going inside the package, and you can see here like the resources that you added. So in our case, it's on your SharePoint file. So you can see like the policy that we created earlier, that one that I didn't save. And also here I can see the users that this has been assigned. So I'm going to show you this in a few minutes. And also here, you can even do the access reviews as we configured earlier. You can see like how many times this access review has been run and like who has revoked it, like who doesn't have access and so on. So just going back to the connected organizations. So if I go here on the organizations, here you can specify like which organization you trust. So you can say for the organization that I trust, I can give access. That's why you have that option allow on to your connect organizations. Okay. So when you're creating that package, then what you get is you get that My Access Portal link. Okay. And what do you do with that one here? So sorry, here you can see like a summary of that package. As example, it has a SharePoint file. It belongs to the Microsoft Reactor catalog. It's created by me, and here pretty much you get that URL for the portal. And what do you do pretty much is you go and you just send that URL to the users that you would like to get access. Okay. So and now I'm just jumping to my the other tenant, the partner tenant, which is, sorry, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So what happens is, so the user on the other side, on the pretty much third party, on the third party, they get that email and they click on that URL. So when they click on the URL, it takes them to this portal. So that portal does not belong to your organization. It's more like an Azure portal. It's independent. So, and they log into this portal with their organization username and password. So when they do that, they can see here what packages are available for them. Okay. In our case, as example, the available package is the one I created earlier. Give it a second. So, which is the Access SharePoint site package, right? So if I click on that one, I can see here like what access I'm going to get. Okay.
So Dimitri, just recapping what we're seeing here, right? So
yes.
once you created the package, wearing your hat as an admin, You generate
Yes.
a URL.
Yes.
You send that URL on email as an invitation to the partner organization who you trust.
Yes.
To those users who need to, okay, hey, please click here if you want access to my resources.
Yes.
And now you switch hats. You're now actually showing what the user on the other end would see when they click the link,
Yes.
and how they gain access to the package, right?
Exactly. And you just request access. And when you request access, pretty much the request that you're doing, and again, I have just to go back to my previous tenant. That request is pretty much going to a similar portal, but this is pretty much is accessed by me. I'm the one that is going to approve it. Okay, and I can see here that I have approved. It's on the history. So just give it a second. I can see here that I approved. As you can see here, approved the request that the user did, let's say a few minutes ago. And I can see here
now you're back with your admin hat.
Yes, now I'm back on my organization.
Looking at users who have requested access to the package.
Yes.
And they're going through that workflow, approval workflow, so that you can grant access to those users, right?
Exactly. I'm on because I'm the approver on this one here, right? Yeah. So that's pretty much my portal when I can approve. So the same portal is for the third party where they can request access to the packages. And here I can see pretty much the who submitted it. That's the partner organization, what access they're gonna get. They even answer the questions: what's department and what's the team name, what's the business justification, and what access they're gonna get. Okay, so when I'm going to approve this one here, then the third-party organization, the user that requested the access, will get an email and it will say your request has been approved. Okay, so that's how pretty much that's how we're creating. If I just go back here, and I'm just going to my users, that's how the guest user here is being created. And as you can see, it's a guest user, and it's an external Azure ID. And it's from the creation type is from an invitation, and that I can see that guest user. Now, I may have additional requirements, right? One of these requirements may be all my guest users will use MFA. So in order to do this, I need pretty much to create a conditional access policy. So I have a few here for my lab environment, but I'm going to just go on this one here, which require MFA for all the external users. And what I've done here, I've said I want all guests and external users, okay, for all the cloud applications to grant them access, but require multi-factor authentication. So that means when any guest user will try to access my environment, let's say in our case, is this just accessing my SharePoint site, they will prompt for MFA. So I'm just closing this one here as I already created it. And the way that it works pretty much is, so the first time pretty much you get that request, it goes and says, we need more information from you. Okay, and that's pretty much how you're just creating, and then it takes you through the steps to set up your MFA. Because I've done this already, that's why I just took the screenshots. So I've done I set up the MFA, but I will show you how it works. So let me just go back to this now on my partner organization, and pretty much I want to access Now I'm on the partners site, and I want to access the SharePoint. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm clicking pretty much on this here. I may be already signed in. I may just have to let me sign out, please. Okay. Sign out, and then, as I said, now I'm on the third-party organization environment, and I want to access the SharePoint. So this is I'm just using my user, and now just give me a second just to put the password. This is the password. Guest user, and here now I will just prompt for the MFA, And now, like you can't see that one here, but I just got like a prompt on my phone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say approve this access. So when this access will be approved, now it will just take that guest user. Let's say yes. It will take that guest user to move to my SharePoint site, and they have access.
Fantastic, fantastic.
And now a third party, they can access like one of your resources. In this case, I said that's a SharePoint. We can have like a specific application. We can even set like a specific like a group and so on. And of course, when the access is being provisioned, you get like say request approved for this specific user. So it's where it was approved, from what was the request organization, and so on. Also, one more thing I want to show you before I finish. If I go back to so we have additional settings for our external identities. So if I go back to my Azure Active Directory and I click on external identities here, and then just go to the external collaboration settings. So we have additional settings here you can set up. So as example, all guest users have the same access as your members, or you can be more restrictive. Like guest users access is restricted only to specific properties, or collaboration restrictions. So I'll allow invitations to be sent to any domain. That's the most inclusive. But I can even say, I want only invitations to go to specific domains. So you have different options here where you can pretty much secure that external access as well. And that's a new feature here, the cross-tenant access settings, where if you have like a trust relationship, you can say the third party can set up the MFA, and you could say as an organization, I'm trusting that, so I don't have to create like an MFA on my organization for that guest user. That's it, pretty much my demo. If you have any questions.
No, that's awesome, Jimmy. Thank you very much. That was a very good demo. I think if we just recap what we witnessed today, what we talk about today, right? We talk about Microsoft security as a whole, and the principles of zero trust security that Kenny explained, and how they're important when building not only Microsoft cloud solutions, but even with capabilities that expand the Microsoft cloud environment into on-prem, into other cloud providers, right? We saw how Azure AD, one of the components of the entire Microsoft security landscape, Azure AD is this identity management and access management umbrella on top of the Microsoft cloud solutions, right? Things on top of Azure, on top of Dynamics, on top of Microsoft 365, and how it helps to protect your solutions as you go to develop new applications, leveraging these components, right? So we look at how Azure AD makes use of signals that are present from a user login, not only the username and password, but also what's the time of this login, where is the user located, where is this login coming from, what device the user is coming, what application is being used to log on. So all of these contextual information about the authentication can be leveraged for conditional access to your Microsoft cloud solutions. And we just saw in the demo, for example, how entitlement management can simplify the provisioning of access to multiple resources that make up your application, your solution, right? These can be groups that can give you access to many different things, folders, SharePoint sites, database applications, right? Reports. You can create a package, an access package, and manage that through entitlement management, and how to put some controls in place to make sure that if you have, for example, integration with partner organizations, that your partner, that the users that partner organization can still be able to access those resources in your organization, but you can enforce, for example, an extra level of security with MFA, right? So I think that was a bit of a summary of what we discussed today with Kenny and Jimmy. That was an amazing session.
And just to add on top of that, Fabio, like instead of just creating manually your guest users, that's like an automated process, right? We just helps you a lot. So it's just because otherwise you may spend more time just creating these guest users like manually.
Fantastic. Thank you. So, Sarah, don't know if we have time for questions in the chat. So what do we have there?
Thanks, Fabio. We haven't had any questions come through, but we can always, as always, give everyone another minute to ask any questions. In the meantime, I'll just remind everyone that we've put in the link to the YouTube channel. So that'll take you directly to this recording and the on-demand version straight after the live session has ended today. And we've also put in the survey with the event code 15473. So if you have time to fill that out today, that would be great and help us curate our future topics. And we'll also put in there the link to our meetup page, so you can check out all our future upcoming events at the Reactor Sydney and anything happening in the reactors globally as well. And keep an eye out, because we will be putting up an episode number 3 for the Glue It series coming up in May at some point. So we will have that out shortly for you as well. So keep an eye out for that one coming out. We haven't. Oh, sorry, were you going to finish with that? I'll let you finish with that in a second, but I'll just say again, we haven't had any questions come through. But Fabio, is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
You stole my thunder about episode 3. But that's all right. That's all right. So the Glue It series will come back in May with episode 3, walking up on that stack. So we started today with Azure AD. Next one of the rank is Microsoft Graph. How can we leverage the power of Microsoft Graph to integrate Microsoft Cloud Solutions? So that's the next topic of the next episode, right? So I would like to thank you, Kenny and Dimi, for your time and your expertise. It was a lovely chat to talk to you guys today. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank
you very much, Singh. Thank you.
Thanks, team.
Sarah, thank you very much. And to everyone who joined us today, thank you very much for your time and thank you very much for your attention. I'll see you next episode.
Great. Thank you. Have a good rest of your afternoon, evening, or morning. We'll see you next time for another Microsoft Reactor live stream event.